Hi Year 7 and welcome to the first lesson in our distance learning. We're starting a new topic. We're going to do about the Middle Ages. You might hear it called the medieval period or the Dark Ages. Basically, it's the period after the Roman Empire in Europe, and it goes from about 500 AD to somewhere about 1300. Our title for today is Developments in Medicine During the Middle Ages, and our learning objective is to assess to what extent medicine developed during this period was actually effective. You'll be able to find today's lesson in the assignments. Have a look, as you can see, circled in the tab at the top. You'll be able to find a Word document that looks like this. This is where you can write all your answers, share all your thoughts, and then upload it into the same assignments tab at the top for today's lesson so that I can see what you've done and give you some feedback. Okay, the first thing to do today to get our brains going is the starter task. In this image, you can see lots of real examples of medical tools from the Middle Ages, so over 1,000 years old. And the question is, what do you think they suggest about medieval medicine? So pause the video now and complete task 1 on your worksheet. Okay, we'll review those answers together as a class, but for the moment, just a couple big ideas about our first topic. Firstly, for many peasants in medieval Europe, disease and poor health were common. So quite simply, it was very normal for people probably to suffer from poor health conditions. The medicines were quite basic, and certainly in Europe, often they were quite useless. Now, you might disagree because there'll be some things that kind of worked, but in general, historians have been quite critical of the medical methods and thinking that they were using during this period. That doesn't mean that they weren't trying to cure people, though they definitely were. And in fact, in the Middle East in particular, doctors were definitely far more effective. So those are the big ideas for today's lesson. We're in this period after the Roman Empire. We're going to talk all about disease and poor health, which were actually very, very common things. And we're also going to try and see some of the differences between Europe and the Middle East. Now, the first thing to do is, instead of doing a bit of research, I'd like you to have a think, what do you think people did to treat some of these illnesses? So for example, the first one there, skin disease or bruises or fainting. What do you think a medieval medical treatment might have been? So before you do any research, pause the video now and fill in the first column of your table. Now that you've had a think about what the doctors in the Middle Ages might have done to help people with their health problems, do a bit of research based on this slide here. These are some of the real treatments that were given during the period. Can you match these to the conditions that you've just looked at? So on your table for task 2, you're now going to complete the second and third column, because once you've done this, I'd like you to have a think very simply. Do you think it was effective? Would it have helped this health condition or not? Pause the video and see if you can match up these treatments to the conditions. Come back once you're ready. Okay, so you should have completed your table by now. For your own knowledge, these are the correct solutions. So for example, you can see toothache was solved in the Middle Ages in Europe by getting a candle and burning it close to the tooth. The idea was that the worms that were in your tooth would fall into a cup of water that was being held by your mouth. Sounds nice, I know. So if you've made any mistakes, feel free to correct what you've done so far. We're going on, and now we're just going to make the simple point that it wasn't all that bad. In fact, they did have some important new ideas during the Middle Ages, even in Europe. So for example, they discovered that broken bones could actually be healed a lot faster by using a cast, as you can see in the picture on the right. We're now going to jump into the Islamic world. What was this like during the same period? Some key ideas for you here. Muslim towns and hospitals with isolation units for contagious diseases. Muslim doctors did post-mortem, so that's when after someone died they would actually look inside the body to see if they could learn what had happened. They noticed that blood circulated around the body, and that was 400 years before that was discovered in Western Europe. Doctors had to pass an exam, and they also had female doctors and nurses as well. So it was quite a professional attitude towards treating people. And wounded crusaders, they were soldiers from Europe who had come to fight in the Islamic Empire. They actually preferred to go to a Muslim doctor rather than a Christian one because they knew they'd be getting better treatment. So there's some simple ideas to introduce you to the idea of what medicine was like in the Islamic world. Watch the YouTube video on here. It's also linked to in the assignment. See what you can find out about treatment in the Islamic period. And then complete one of these tasks. Option A, option B, or option C. And you can do that in task 3 on your worksheet. You can see that there are sentence starters here, but just be aware that option A is probably the easiest, whereas option C is the most difficult. And if you're aiming for EE or above in history, then I definitely encourage you to go for option C. Pause the video now, complete the task, and come back when you're ready. Okay, so that brings us neatly to the end of today's lesson. We've been learning all about what it was like in the medieval period when you had health problems and how were they treated. I'd like you to think about this last big question: how effective was medieval medicine? I'd like to summarize your answer in a tweet and get a few hashtags in there as well. You can complete that on the worksheet on task 4. And once you've done that, you're all finished. So well done. This is what we've been learning today, and hopefully you can identify with either the red, the grey, or the yellow. Please share your thoughts on how well you've learned today in the chat after you've finished, and I look forward to seeing your work. Don't forget to look back once it's been submitted and I've checked it so that you can see your feedback and make any improvements that you might like to.